This program is brought to you by Monflo, Ito Innovative Technology, Real Root Supplements, Pro Privacy, Goud 999 en VRB, van eenmanszaak naar BV.
We had Nature, Science, Cell, Virology, Lancet. They all used identical words. They said, we are not criticising your science, we're just saying we cannot publish this as it is not in the public interest. No, it's for the greater good. As they say, when anybody says, this is for the greater good, we all have to play our part. Run for the hills, you know.
Yes.
You know, that is the big warning sign.
Yeah. Do you believe the COVID vaccine is creating turbo cancers? And if so, what would the mechanism be?
We don't have much time, so the answer is yes.
They are lying to you and they are controlling you.
That's your answer. We are beyond the tipping point.
During the battle for science in February this year, we brought some of the most courageous and outspoken international voices of our time to the Netherlands. Names such as Bigtree, Peter McCullough, Susharit Bhakti, and many others shared their perspectives on the state of science, health, media, and the societal developments we are all witnessing today. In addition to their appearances on stage, we recorded exclusive interviews. In this series, you now have the opportunity to watch these conversations. Today, we offer you American journalist Bigtree, who spoke with British oncologist Professor Dr. Angus Dalgleish for Lighthouse TV. Two inspiring and courageous men in one room. An interview you don't want to miss. Enjoy.
Dr. Angus Dalgleish, I want to thank you for joining me today. For people's understanding, what is, you're a doctor. What is your expertise? What is your specialty?
Well, my specialty is officially oncology. I've been a cancer doctor. But I came there through a lot of training. I started as a flying doctor, so real general medicine. Then I trained in general medicine in Australia in the big teaching hospitals. And I decided I was going to focus on cancer. And in the training, I got exposed to a lot of immunology. And I realized that immunology was potentially the way to really treat cancer. But that was a long way away. And then I moved to Sydney to do real...
So what that realization, what time period was that you realized this? Because immunology now is really coming into the limelight around cancer.
Well, I can tell
you,
you,
were you first thinking
it was
that?
late 70s.
Oh, late 70s. So that
yes.
thought was all the way back in the 70s.
Yes. And then I moved to Sydney and completed and became fully trained and got my certificates for being an oncologist. And I realized I was going to be bored if I just did that the rest of my life. I wanted to do some research. And I'd come to the conclusion that perhaps a lot of viruses could cause cancer. They'd just got the first evidence for hepatitis B. And I thought there may be many others there. So I wanted to do this as a research project. I'd always shunned them on the way up. I never thought the projects were interesting enough. So I came back to London to work with Robin Weiss, who was a big retrovirologist. And I thought that was where we were going to discover them. And I was working on a project, and the first...
Really quickly, for someone, what's the difference between a virus and a retrovirus? Or is it, how do I think about that? What is a retrovirus?
Right. They're both viruses, but a retrovirus is an RNA virus that can program itself into your DNA. And this has very interesting implications for messenger RNA vax genes.
So a virus can't insert itself into your DNA, essentially, but a retrovirus can.
Yes, the normal RNA viruses, for instance, and airborne viruses are never going to do any damage to your DNA at all.
Okay.
But a retrovirus, when you get infected with that, it can do a reverse, hence the retro, insertion into your DNA and just sit there and stay there for a long time. And the first one was a leukemia virus, which is discovered to be in the Caribbean and Japan. And the second one was actually HIV, which I was in exactly the right place when HIV came along. And from my point of view, it fulfilled the association with cancer. because it presented with rare lymphomas, Kaposi sarcoma, like they'd never seen, as well as infections, all features of its immune suppression. So the association with cancer was actually indirect as opposed to direct, which is what I set out to research.
So is that then the mechanism, of viruses or, retroviruses to cancer? Is it just that it's the result of the shutting down of the immune system or the immune destruction? Or is it just HIV that was the case?
It's just HIV. There's a lot of mouse models, but in a human situation, it's just HIV.
Okay.
Now, the other viruses that are associated with cancer in humans are all big DNA viruses that integrate any rate. And you have heard of these: Epstein-Barr virus, and which causes lymphoma, human papilloma virus with the cervix, human the HBV and CV, which are hepatitis viruses, which both can cause cancer. Now, in all these situations, it usually takes years and years and years before it emerges. So my interest is why, and we find the common link is chronic inflammation. So if you got hepatitis B, for instance, and you never had any hepatitis, it just was a silent infection, it would be extremely unlikely. But if you go through it's acute and then chronic hepatitis, it becomes more likely. And we found that link with a lot of things. And HIV in particular, I was fascinated because HIV infects these CD4 helper cells, which are, I call them the conductor of the immunological orchestra. So if you really want to mess up their nice sounding symphony, you shoot the conductor. Well, that's what HIV...
So CD4 is that conductor?
Yeah, is the conductor, yes.
Okay.
Now, I thought, because I was part of the team that discovered that was the receptor, how it got in, and we saw as we followed people, the CD4 count fall off over the years, and then they got AIDS, so we assumed that's all there was to it. But over the years, we found that people had the HIV, you could isolate it from their CD4 cells circulating, but they weren't developing disease. So that could not be the only explanation. And then I went back to all the chronic viruses that can cause cancer do so by causing chronic inflammation. And slowly we realized that the people who got AIDS quickest and died quickest, they had evidence the most incredible pan-inflammation activation. So the T cell depletion was secondary to that. And the most wonderful model going was the chimpanzee, because the chimpanzee has the same immune system as us, has the same lymphocytes, the same receptor. He gets infected and he sits there happy, couldn't care less. Now, why is that? Because his genetic background doesn't react to the virus, so he doesn't have an inflammatory response to it. Therefore, he doesn't get ill. So this was actually revolutionizing, that you slow down this inflammation, and that's a better way to control the disease than just trying to keep getting rid of the virus. So this is applied to a lot of the clinical problems and the research that I've done over the years.
Fascinating. Very, very interesting. So now let's cut to the virus du jour, the virus we're all talking about, COVID virus, and this pandemic that took place. What was your first interest, or what was your first perspective from the moment this started? Your viruses is a part of your understanding disease is. As you are watching in China, we're seeing people fall face first, and what was your initial reaction to COVID?
My initial reaction was that it was just another, like SARS-1. And it was interesting, my son's friends in Australia were telling him, no, there's something going on here. It's not that simple. It sounds like it's spreading, and they're not doing much to stop it. So this was a conspiracy theory.
Right.
So I was exposed to that, and very concerned what was going on. And the thing that concerned me most was the WHO, because there clearly was an outbreak in Wuhan.
Yeah.
And had the WHO been remotely competent, that virus would never have left Wuhan, in my understanding. Now, why was this? SARS-1, over 20 years ago, when they had the outbreak, WHO went in and they sorted it out, and they were highly critical of China and how they managed that. So what was China's response? Instead of improving things, we don't like being criticised, we're going to get rid of this lot and replace them with our own, which they did. Tedros Ghebreyesus. And from Ethiopia, of course, which China were heavily in and funding. And he, I believe, is the most inappropriate person to be a leader of the WHO.
Why?
I mean, he's not even a doctor.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's just, and he seems to be remarkably ill-informed in the stupid things that he says. It's rather like a puppet has taken over. So China, basically, as you know, did control the WHOs. They wouldn't let them do the job. And then they made them come in and do a whitewash over where the origins were, etc. So the whole thing was a mess. But before that, I think the most interesting thing was as soon as that sequence was released, my colleague with whom we had got a very good HIV vaccine, and I was brought in to help improve it, because we were probably the only two people who said you do not make an HIV vaccine out of an envelope. There were big envelope, different technologies. Tony Fauci's been doing that for 40 years. It does not work.
Yeah.
You know, Einstein's definition of idiocy is to keep repeating the same thing, expecting a better outcome. So we realized you do not use the envelope. You use the highly conserved bits. And Birger Sorensen from Germany, he picked these 4 bits and he had really great results, but nobody wanted to hear them because it wasn't part of the orthodoxy. He knew I was saying the same thing, so we joined forces. Okay. So the bottom line is, as soon as that sequence is there, he called me up and he said, let's do a COVID vaccine based on the same principles. We had both decided you would not want to use the spike because it's like the envelope. Too many antigens, too much noise.
De uitzendingen van Lighthouse TV bevatten reclames. En ik weet dat sommigen van jullie daar last van hebben. Toch is het belangrijk dat ze er zijn. Want zonder deze inkomsten zou Lighthouse nu niet bestaan. Maar er is goed nieuws. Want vanaf oktober starten we met het Lighthouse Insider account. Daarmee kijk je al onze programma's volledig reclamevrij. Krijg je korting op de webshop, events en krijg je toegang tot de aankoop van een Lighthouse TV token. Een micro-aandeel op de blockchain. Mooie ontwikkelingen dus, maar tot die tijd wil ik je vragen om begrip. Haak niet af als je reclames ziet, maar probeer om te denken. Iedere spot die je ziet helpt Lighthouse TV financieel vooruit. En draagt indirect bij aan ons onafhankelijke en kritische geluid. En dat is keihard nodig. Dank voor je steun.
And so I thought, that's great. And he comes back and he says, this is no normal virus. It's got 6 inserts in it, and they're all highly positively charged. I talked to my colleagues, immunologists, molecular virologists. None of them seem to understand the importance of charges. Berger's a biophysicist, which is why he thinks above. It's pointless having a range of sequences if you don't take into account what are they going to code for. And we had these sequences of 4 amino acids which are highly positive charged around the receptor binding site, which would convert a magnet for its receptor like a fridge magnet. Sorry, convert a virus like a fridge magnet. So heavily positively charged, cells negative, like that. So it greatly enhances its ability to infect, becomes more infectious and more dangerous.
So the positive charge means it's going to attract. Is that because what it's attracted to is negatively charged? Is it like a magnet where it's opposites, north and south type thing?
Exactly. Now people say, well, that could happen by just random mutations. It could, but it wouldn't survive very long, because nature abhors great big peaks and irregularities, and it would be edited out. So here you have these 6 positive charges. Now, I found 2 of them in the literature from the Wuhan lab. They'd boasted. They'd put these inserts in and made a bat-like virus capable of infecting human cells. Well, I mean, so when I pointed out this is absolute evidence that this came from the lab, it had been completely genetically engineered, and I was very kind, it escaped, and that's the most likely thing because viruses from high containment labs do escape. We found 6 in the literature of SARS-1 escaping from highly contained laboratories. So, and I understand it occurs all the time, but it's not reported. So, what was the big deal?
Right.
So why did they come in and basically threaten us, silence us, tell us to shut up? My own university said you're not allowed to discuss the origin. I said, well, we've already submitted the paper proving all this. And then that comes to another thing. At one by one, we cannot take your paper. We had Nature, Science, Cell, Virology, Lancet. They all used identical words. They said, we are not criticising your science. We're just saying we cannot publish this as it is not in the public interest. They all used the same words.
Not in the public interest.
And one of them, I think it was Nature, the rejection was 5 hours. Now, I've published several papers in Nature previously.
Meaning they read it, reviewed it,
they knew
came to the conclusion, and came up with this line, it's not in public interest within 5 hours.
So in the end, when we did publish it, we had to pretend it was a paper on vaccines and the importance of the biophysical functions, and we got it published in the Quarterly Review of Biophysics Discovery because the editor was an expert in biophysics. He immediately understood where we were coming from. And he'd been on the Nobel Prize Committee and chairman of it once, so he was very good at assessing science. Yeah. So we were able to publish it, but if you just read the title and the abstract, then it was okay. If you actually read the paper, we delineated all the evidence why it was manufactured, and more importantly, why the spike protein was highly dangerous. Because 80% of it, 79 if you're a pedant, was identical to human epitopes, which meant if you use this as a vaccine, you were going to get horrendous autoimmunity guaranteed.
Because it's going to mirror different things that already exist in your body. Exactly. You're going to tell the immune system that's your enemy. It's going to start fighting.
It's going to be attacking your own body. And that's exactly what we sat back and witnessed. And we gave all this information to the government through one of the ministers of that, Michael Gove at the time, and it went to Whitty, who was meant to be the chief medical officer, and Valence, who's meant to be the chief science officer. I say meant because had they been remotely competent, they would have seen that this was a massive red flag and acted accordingly and not allowed a vaccine to be rolled out.
Yeah.
The other thing was, and we've heard this from many, many people, that us senior clinicians recognise this as just any old respiratory virus, especially after the first wave. And one of the things that's very important is this highly engineered, highly infective virus. The virus, I believe, posed no significant problem. Because it was so highly engineered, it would be so rapidly pushed by the evolutionary forces to attenuate to a non-dangerous virus, which is what happened with Omicron, of course.
Yeah.
But we were all led to believe, stay at home. And I was treating people exactly like Peter McCullough. High doses of vitamin D, mouthwash, sprays, even Becotide, a steroid you can inhale if you're asthmatic. Yeah. We found that people were starting to develop respiratory problems. You gave them Becotide, antihistamine, all things you can get over the counter. And I wasn't aware of any death of anybody, some of whom were very ill, and they asked me for information about what to do because they had already started to grasp that if they went into the hospital, they were likely not to come out because the ventilators were killing people.
Right.
Because this was a disease that caused inflammation of the lung, which you should be sucking that out. They should have been putting suckers in, not forcing it back in and killing them. That's what it did. There was an order for, I saw, 35,000 ventilators for the NHS. I don't know how many people but they were killed before they worked out this is not the sort of thing you do. You use ventilators when you want to push fluid back in caused by heart failure and other things like that. Not because you got an inflammation like that. You need to suck it out. And it took them ages. It was really unbelievable how bad the implication of everything by the doctors were. I mean, I criticise the doctors. It's easy to criticise the politicians, and they were being driven. But the doctors, my colleagues, should say, no. This is absolutely dreadful. We will kill patients. It is not our job to kill patients, but do everything we can to help them, and first do no harm. And actually, we were being told to use remdesivir if they did go into the hospital after they'd stopped killing them with ventilators. And it was interesting. We overheard nurses call it run death is near, which is pretty spot on, because they had about a 5% mortality rate. You know, for a disease that had less than 1% mortality rate, even if they were sick enough to go to hospital.
Right. So, I would say, I've said doctors murdered people. Why couldn't they wake up? What was the lack of, what is the blind spot in medicine that had doctors, first of all, sending people home? It's the first disease we've ever seen where instead of treating you the moment you come in, I'm having trouble breathing, they would say, go home, essentially till your lips are blue, come back, and then we'll throw you on a ventilator, and now 9 out of 10 you're going to die. It was the first time we'd seen medicine in decades, or, early treatment has always been the answer to everything. Cancer, flu, a cold, you name it, get on it early. In this situation, all of medicine says, no, we're not going to treat you at all. We have nothing for you. We're going to tell you, don't take ivermectin. Don't take any of the things that anyone is telling you works. Don't take anything at all. Come back to us when you're really sick. How the hell did doctors go along with that?
Op dit exacte moment bewegen er miljoenen onzichtbare frequenties door jouw lichaam en de ruimte om je heen. Radiogolven, wifi, bluetooth, licht en geluid, magnetische velden en misschien zelfs signalen die we nog niet volledig begrijpen. Je ziet ze niet, je hoort ze niet, je voelt ze misschien onbewust, maar wat als ze meer invloed hebben op je leven dan je beseft? Wat is eigenlijk een frequentie? En als alles in het universum trilt, resoneert en een eigen frequentie heeft, welke rol spelen deze onzichtbare krachten dan in ons dagelijks leven? Nou, dat is één van de grote vragen die we gaan onderzoeken tijdens de allereerste editie van de Battle Beyond Science op 18 en 19 september dit jaar. Na het grote succes van de Battle for Science in februari, waar de staat van de wetenschap centraal stond, gaan we nu op zoek naar antwoorden op vragen waar de wetenschap geen of nog geen antwoord op heeft. Welke invloed hebben frequenties op ons lichaam, op onze gezondheid, op onze emoties en bewustzijn? En als die invloed er dan is, hoe werkt dat dan? Nou, dat gaan we dus visualiseren. Op grote schermen tonen we live hoe geluid, water, licht en trillingen zich vertalen naar indrukwekkende patronen en vormen. Niet alleen maar om het te zien, maar vooral ook om te leren, te ervaren en te voelen. Laat je dus verrassen door inspirerende lezingen, live-experimenten met onder andere remote viewing, telepathie, tijdreizen, kwantummechanica en soundhealing sessies die wetenschap, verwondering en beleving samenbrengen. Met bijzondere gasten zoals de Britse wetenschapper John Stuart Reid, Erik Larakker, Marijn Poels, Baptiste de Paap, professor Pierre Capel, contactee Elena Danaan en vele andere. Stuk voor stuk sprekers die je zullen uitdagen om verder te kijken dan de grenzen van de traditionele wetenschap. Reserveer vandaag nog je ticket en beleef het allemaal op 18 of 19 september tijdens de allereerste editie van de Battle Beyond Science. Want alles heeft een frequentie.
Waarom zou je moeilijk doen met allerlei apps, wallets en bankrekeningen als dat in één account kan? Beheer al je euro's en crypto's eenvoudig in één app waarbij je altijd toegang hebt tot jouw geld. En de boodschappen betaal je eenvoudig met de betaalpas die je wereldwijd kunt gebruiken. Ga nu naar www.monflow.com/lighthouse en ontvang ook nog eens een gratis betaalpas.
Werk jij als ondernemer nog vanuit een eenmanszaak of VOF? Heb je een goedlopend bedrijf en maak je winst? Maar voel je je als een hamster in een hamsterrad? Je werkt hard, maar je komt geen stap vooruit. Dan kan dat heel goed kloppen. Want waar een eenmanszaak of VOF een fiscale fuik is en jou als ondernemer klein houdt, is een beschermende BV-structuur juist een fiscaal vliegwiel dat je helpt om iets op te bouwen en te groeien. Want met een beschermende BV-structuur betaal je tot wel 50% minder winstbelasting. Je houdt daardoor veel meer over om weer te investeren en al je bezittingen zijn optimaal beschermd. Wil je weten hoe dit zit voor jouw situatie? Vraag dan nu gratis het e-book aan Van eenmanszaak naar de beschermende BV-structuur via vrbadvies.nl.
I can only assume it's because the whole thing was managed from the top down, WHO, through all the agencies and the government. I was horrified to find we've got about 43 in the UK of WHO signed up centres to give advice, etc., to the government. And then they said, this is like a military operation, a war, as opposed to just another pandemic. And they got hold of the doctors and they said, you've got to do this, that and the other, blah, blah. So it became a top-down management. So right to, we are only obeying orders. And anybody who did stand up and said, I'm going to give my patients ivermectin. And then when they saw patients who dropped dead quite literally after the vaccine. I mean, they really were. A lot of I've heard half a dozen people I knew who dropped dead after the vaccine, myocarditis, heart attacks, etc. And they said, no, I think you're too at risk for that. They were actually set on, punished and hounded. Now, I've never, ever seen that. I never thought I'd see it in my life where good doctors who are prepared to try something quite straightforward and simple, not dangerous, were hounded.
Talking about ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine.
Ivermectin was one.
Yeah.
And I knew ivermectin was good very early on because I'd heard from reports. And I authorised it on a couple of severe ill patients who were better. Within 2 days, they felt better in hours. And they were sitting up breathless, really, really ill. I'd previously given them vitamin D and all these other things that I know you have to go to make them good. But it was clear they never went to the hospital. They got up and then thought, what was that all about? If I hadn't, they'd have gone to hospital, all the costs of being in hospital, all the what it takes and all the things, the number of staff involved for somebody who's really critically ill is enormous, and the cost. So it was rather like this was something that they wanted to see. I couldn't believe it. And the more I get away from it, the more I realise that it was medical incompetence converted into medical negligence. And the fact they didn't stop it when we screened and wrote the letter, it becomes criminal medical negligence on a grand scale. And I think these people who push this forward should be punished for it, because they could have stood up and said, up with this, I will not, but if you carry on, I'm going to resign. None of them did. They all shut up. They got, in the UK, they give them knighthoods, part of the bribery system, and fellowships of this, that, and the other, and they all shut up. Now, and we have yet to hold these people to account. And I don't believe we can actually really get back to any form of trust till we hold these people to account. And it involves everybody. I got targeted by the directors of the hospital, the head of the president of the Royal College of Physicians. They all hauled me up for spreading misinformation. Well, you can I'll let you imagine how I responded to that, because I wasn't a young doctor. You worried about my job. I was worried about the state of the nation, as it were, and how we had descended to this. So I gave them full barrels. I wasn't having any of this nonsense. But as a result, of course, I got cancelled more and more and pushed out.
Let's talk about the vaccine. So
Right.
mostly we're talking about mismanagement of health, vaccine. A lot of that, run to death is near, and the use this, it was really prior to the saving grace being this vaccine. But you said really from the very beginning, when you started hearing that they were going to use the spike protein as the central point of the vaccine, was there additional concern? That concern, number one, this is the worst part of this. It has all of these similarities to the human body. It's going to cause autoimmune disease. Was there also additional concern with this new technology, the mRNA platform?
Well, we knew that they were going to go charging on to make some vaccine, and I began to think that this is all rather convenient, that they've got all this ready and promise it by this time. There are a different group of immunological friends with whom we had done a cancer-based vaccine, which again, I don't want to call it a vaccine because it's really a pan-immune stimulant and it's very, very effective. We decided to write a paper on why, after 20 years of intense coronavirus vaccine research, and they're particularly keen on it for animals, I think that to save them a lot of money if it was effective, why they'd never come up with one. So we actually delved into the literature. The first thing is, coronaviruses are far too variable. A wave will only last 2 to 3 months, and when it comes again, it will be completely different. The second thing was really frightening, was when they did vaccinate for these animals and models, etc., all the antibody and responses were against the virus, which now no longer existed. And then, when the new wave came along, they couldn't cope with it because the immune system was just focused on something that had gone. No, I'm busy, So it left a hole at the back in which the new viruses come in. They shoot up their sort of little missiles at them, the antibodies, but they don't knock them out or kill them. They grab onto them and say, "You're coming with me," and they enhance the infection.
So the immune enhancement.
It's immune, and we call it antibody-dependent enhancement.
Right.
And it was really incredible. Every single one attempt model showed this. So why would you do it? Now, one thing perhaps somebody aware of that did do, they knew that you could show this in mice, ferrets perhaps, but if you did it in primates, it was lethal. So was it ever tested in primates for humans? No. There's no. And again, that was a big signal. This is all planned. They were going to give the vaccine come hell or high water.
Yeah.
And then when we screamed about side effects, again, we're told, no, it's for the greater good. As they say, when anybody says, this is for the greater good, we all have to play our part. Run for the hills,
Yes.
That is the big warning sign.
Yeah.
And so I could not believe my friends and colleagues going along with this. I was the only one that screamed. I said, do not take this vaccine.
Now, would that be common enough knowledge amongst at least scientists and virologists, or did you have an area of expertise that put you in an advantaged position that they just didn't understand what they were doing? Or is this something that should have been recognized by more experts as an issue?
It should have been recognized by more experts. When I put my case to everybody about this, and it got up to the cabinet and Whitty and Valence, I was dismissed as a clinical cancer doctor. What did I know about vaccines and the immune system? Well, a hell of a lot more than everybody else there combined, I can assure you, because everything we predicted has very unfortunately come true. But most of my colleagues carried on with this nonsense, so, you need it, it's safe, what have you. Even when I could see they were getting ill with it. When the clinic staff, the nurses and the receptionists were all vaccinated, they nearly all had COVID in the first wave, and they went down again. And, I was a lot older than all these people. I hadn't had the vaccine, and I never went down with it. And then I went and tested, have I seen it? And I had no antibodies. Now, that's very important because the whole thing was keep pushing to keep the antibodies high.
Yeah.
And I said it's T-cell response. Respiratory viruses are only contained...
You want your initial innate immune response to really take this thing out.
Very frontline viruses. Yeah. That's what you want. And so I tested for those of mine, and lo and behold, they were twice that of any person half my age who'd had 1, 2, or 3 vaccines. So I rested my case. I mean, I've done the trial on myself.
Yeah.
And then showing how important it was that the vaccines could actually suppress T-cell response and cause these increased infections, which I was seeing with my own eyes. And the Cleveland Clinic went on to
Which would be some form of that disease, antibody immune enhancement that we were worried about.
Without a doubt.
Okay.
And the Cleveland Clinic charted this. I was so surprised that they weren't under the thumb in their staff.
Cleveland Clinic has done some surprisingly good studies.
It was incredible.
This.
This is COVID. This is COVID after 1 vaccine. This is COVID after 2. This is after the booster. This is after the 4th.
Yeah, it just gets getting worse and worse.
It gets worse and worse and worse. So that was just really quite incredible. And then what I noticed was that my melanoma patients were relapsing after the 3rd vaccine. I didn't know this. It was like a 6-week period. I had 6 long-term patients I reviewed, and they'd all come in and relapsed. So they'd had the melanoma come back. One of them was 18 years, and there was 8, 7, 5, and they'd all been put into from stage 4 to complete response with the immunotherapy I was practicing back 20 years ago before these new immunotherapy drugs came in. So the old one used appropriately was very effective. And often you get a relapse in a patient when they deteriorate, they're very depressed, or they've had death, divorce, the usual Ds, etc. And I asked how they all were. There they were, happy as Larry. They were all happy. I said, is there anything recently that's happened that hasn't happened in the last 5, 6 years?
Yeah.
Yes, we've had the booster vaccines as advised by our doctors, and that was it. And so we assessed the T-cell response, and it was completely suppressed. I never got a chance to publish this because I'm so glad to a group from Madrid they published a paper that says most papers are misleading. This paper was 100% accurate. It said T-cell exhaustion in cancer patients after 3rd CoV-2 SARS vaccine. And they had beautiful data. And I went back into the literature and I found that this actually wasn't brand new. It wasn't just associated with messenger RNA technology, that this overstimulation, exhaustion of the T-cell response by focusing on antibodies is actually in the old vaccine literature as a warning.
Wow.
And nobody had obviously ever read it.
So essentially, you keep taxing the immune system. You keep, your T cells are that first line of defense. Like that's going to attack. If that doesn't get the job, then it spills over into the memory side of the immune system, antibody production that will be remembered.
Yes.
But what we should have seen is not the production of antibodies, that most people were probably clearing this before it dropped into that antibody production space, which is where it should have been fought. And instead we made a vaccine that just kept charging the system, and then the T cells get exhausted. They can't do their job any longer.
Perfect summary, but we should never have been doing that, because the logic sold to the governments and to the doctors who said, say, look, we're the doctors, we know what we're talking. Well, they should have, and said, no, you don't keep boosting a vaccine because the antibodies are waning. That's what happens at any rate.
Yeah.
That one boost, the antibodies should wane and the T-cell response should take off, because they were so obsessed on the antibodies, they hit it again. T-cell response, little bit there, comes out, hit it again. Whatever T-cell response completely wiped out, because the immune system is developing all these antibodies that not only useless but dangerous. And why did no one see that? I mean, I thought we had great medical institutes, great universities with top people talking about Nobel Prizes for this and fellows of this, that and the other. And nobody seems to have intervened and said, this is not what we should be doing. They all went complacently along with this. And in my own institute, I was horrified that nobody would back me up on this. But guess why this might be?
Why?
Because a lot of their funding came from people like Moderna.
Yeah.
And this was the creeping insidious invasion of universities and free speech by Big Pharma. And Big Pharma not only did it at the university level, they did it at the ministry level, the NHS, which I regard as one of the most useless health systems in the country, because it is now totally run by Big Pharma, who tell ministers what drugs they're meant to buy for their population, and drown out all the sensible stuff that we were doing for early COVID, because it's the same for all sorts of things that they sell drugs to everybody for, statins, blood pressure. I mean, basically, people should say, do they need that? Can they do minor corrections to their lifestyle so they won't need it? The health service is not doing that. It is a it is a chronic illness service because that is what Big Pharma want. They don't want to have diseases where you give one little course and it's all cured. They don't want diseases where, little course and everybody survives well. And I mean, this does sound like a conspiracy theory. And I have been listening to that for many years. And it suddenly dawned on me with COVID, my God, they are right, actually, because we couldn't get anything sensible and logical through. There was always reasons why you couldn't do it, even to the point where they threatened me that they wouldn't give me ethical permission to do simple things like measure the spike protein and see if in people who are very symptomatic, long COVID, these chronic autoimmune diseases, etc., and they wouldn't fund it. And I wanted to see if you measured the spike protein these people were ill, you gave them a protocol, just like Peter McCulloch said, and there's many other things we can add to that. I am a big fan of low-dose naltrexone. Others are of ivermectin. But basically, we could have a passage and we measure this. Can we get this down? What is the optimal protocol? And then when we get it down, how long do we have to give it before we cleanse it and rid the chances of this resurfacing?
Yeah.
It's not much different really to TB. You can get rid of TB quite quickly, but the big issue, it sits, lurks and comes back and kill you. It could have been a perfect plan. I even got someone who said they'd fund it if I arranged it, a very rich private person.
You could not get the most obvious basic study that anyone should want to do.
The most logical thing to do. And do you know what the director of the NHS, when I said this is the obvious logical thing to do, he said, you're not allowed to do it. And if you do get the money, we'll make sure you don't get ethical approval. I mean, just think about that. Just think, they don't want people to be cured of this stuff. Why not? It's costing the country a fortune, and all Western said we're all bankrupt from all this. And I presented a slide that wasn't mine. Remember in our last conference we were at, and it was from Paul Marrick, and it was a CDC slide that said that they'd finally admitted they were 18 million Americans who'd been chronically lives destroyed as a result of side effects of the vaccine. And I said that was released at the end of 24. And I've just had an update. It's now 36 million.
Wow.
Why would you not want to help these people? And to me, that is just intolerable. And I think we do actually have to change the entire system. I know you have different systems everywhere, but from my point of view, the NHS, it's not fit for purpose. It is now so incompetent and corrupt. It would be much better at completely changing. I mean, I would fire the whole of everybody at the top.
Je werkt hard en spaart, maar toch klopt er iets niet. Geld op de bank lijkt veilig, maar wordt steeds minder waard. Soms zit de oplossing in iets eenvoudigs. Iets wat al duizenden jaren waarde houdt. Goud en zilver. Bij Goud 999 koop je eenvoudig fysiek edelmetaal. Veilig en op jouw naam opgeslagen in Zwitserland. Meer dan 25.000 spaarders gingen je al voor. Wil je niet alleen sparen, maar ook jouw vermogen beschermen? Ga naar goud999safe.com/lighthouse en ontvang tijdelijk 5 gram zilver cadeau.
Waar komt ons eten vandaan en door wie wordt het gemaakt? Die vraag houdt mij al jaren bezig. Daarom ben ik gaan werken aan mijn eigen natuurlijke productlijn. Met ingrediënten van zorgvuldig geselecteerde boeren en afkomstig van dieren die een goed leven hebben gehad. Bij Real Roots beginnen we niet bij het product, maar bij de bron. We selecteren voedingsrijke ingrediënten uit de puurste leefomgevingen. Van vitamine A tot zink brengen we de kracht van dierlijke voeding samen. Orgaanvlees, bottenbouillon, colostrum, oesters en grasgevoerd rundvlees. In geconcentreerde vorm, zodat deze traditionele voedingsmiddelen op een eenvoudige en logische manier passen binnen een moderne dagelijkse routine. Ik ben Gino, oprichter van Real Roots. En ik geloof in de kracht van de natuur. Ontdek wat echte voedingsstoffen voor jou kunnen betekenen op realroots.nl met code Lighthouse.
Wij staan voor een digitale wereld waarin privacy, veiligheid en vrijheid van meningsuiting de norm zijn. Vind jij dat ook belangrijk? Kom dan nu in actie en ontvang gratis de Pro Privacy Checklist met bijna 100 praktische tips waarmee je vandaag nog je privacy kunt terugpakken. Ga naar proprivacy.io/checklist.
Look, I mean, and I think we're trying to do that in America. I think Robert Kennedy Jr. I mean, Trump would have fired everybody, I think, except there's laws around it, and they're running into roadblocks. I want to talk about cancer's your expertise. T cells, this vaccine's destroying, T cell exhaustion. What role do T cells play in cancer, in fighting cancer, in my body's ability to keep me from getting cancer? Are T cells important?
They are your first line of defense. It's not antibodies, it's your T cell response. And if I can give a very simple example, the T cells they're quite complicated. There's different types, but there's a frontline sort of T cell responses, and then there's the adaptive that makes the antibodies and highly specific T cells. But just behind the front line is an expansion of what is basically the innate immune system. So it works, it doesn't need specific signals, it just needs danger signals. And in my research for cancer, I found that when I measured this with patients with cancer, it was really low. It was down in the bottom middle. And so we did a study with very bright registrars who did colorectal cancer. And I'd published all my melanoma along these lines. They said, can we check it out for colorectal? I said, we can, but I thought melanoma might be an exception. So we did all these patients before they were going to have their cancer removed. And all of them had completely suppressed. Now, here was the interesting thing. I wanted to know whether that was the cancer or why they got cancer. So we took the cancer out, and they showed me that the vast majority in those days before COVID, you could completely remove it. Now with COVID, it's a different story. Completely remove it, and then we'd measure the same immune response 1 to 2 months later, back in the normal range. No treatment, no boosters of any kind, back in the normal range. And then we found that the patients who didn't come back in the normal range, the lowest, they were the first to die as we followed them up over the years. So that shows you how important the immune system was to that. So then we measured it in everybody, and we found that this innate immune system starts to fall off when you're about 55. And when you're about 70, 75, it's down there. And when you plot the cancer incidence curve prior to the vaccines, it really didn't start to rise much till about 55, and then it rises, peaks at late 70s. It's a butterfly wing. So is this because the innate immune system's falling off? And I said, it's not proof, we don't know, let's try. And if you boost that innate immune response, we're getting much, much better control of cancers that we normally had great problems with. And I believe that's the most important thing to do in cancer management. Once again, we've been unable to get any traction on it because we've got very good things from Mr. Pfizer and all these people. So when the cancer comes along, we've got these things to treat that cost hundreds of thousands. I mean, it's completely ridiculous. This would actually, this thing I've been working on is basically work by others. Stanford and Rook worked on they wanted to improve BCG, which is widely regarded as not a very good TB vaccine, but it is actually a fantastic innate immune boosting vaccine.
It's wild. I've done some research on that and interesting studies on diabetes and multiple sclerosis by boosting,
But you can't. But you cannot use it more than twice to boost because you then get this inflammatory antibody system. So these guys said ideally we'd like one that we could use that kept boosting the innate immune system, and they came up with them. It's a heat-killed relative called Mycobacterium vaccae and OBNC. I've used both. They're both clinically very good, and I've given them a dozen times, and they just boost the T cell. It's absolutely perfect what you want. For some reason, the heat-killing process prevents them stimulating the antibody response. So I believe that the biggest problem with innate immunity is vitamin D deficiency.
Okay.
Now, that is really easy to measure and correct. The next thing is to actually give them a really good boost. And I think these heat-killed things, which I've done so much work in cancer, we showed a survival added to chemo versus chemo alone in pancreatic cancer. It's highly significant, but still nobody seemed to be terribly interested in this simple, safe thing. It's because of the workup for TB, it's been given to thousands of patients. There's never been an SAE 3 or 4. I mean, that means a serious adverse event other than just local reactions, etc.
Wow.
And yet they'll go on about, we can't register it because we need the safety profile. Of course, none of these things we worried about with the COVID vaccine, ironically. But this
or even when they were using BCG vaccines for everything else.
I think it's a very good moment, actually, to say, to reiterate, I'm so glad that you brought it up about how useful it is. But the geniuses that run our country decided to withdraw BCG in 2005 as no longer useful, just as the graphs of TB were going through the roof from all the immigration and drug abuse, etc. I mean, it's the only one that they withdrew. And meanwhile, my colleagues and friends at the State Serum Institute in Denmark have done a long-term follow-up of BCG, and now it's coming up to 50, 60 years, and they have shown, because they've been able to do the equivalent of a randomized study, i.e. compare heavily BCG vaccinated countries with those who refuse to take it up in the same sort of group, and compare them side by side. And guess what? The first thing is that the cardiac disease, atherosclerosis, death, is far less in the BCG people than the non. The incidence of cancer is much less. So this, I rest my case, boosting this innate immune system above the norm is that actually has a lifelong protection.
We could also probably argue, I would think, that our sterilization of the world that we live in and the destruction of tuberculosis, which may have been bad for a very small group of people, but was probably boosting us where we were somehow fighting, didn't have such propensity for cancer. I don't have much more time with you, so I want to just ask turbo cancers, this idea of turbo cancers. Do you believe the COVID vaccine is creating turbo cancers? And if so, what would the mechanism be?
We don't have much time, so the answer is yes. And what is the mechanism? Well, I have been working with many colleagues on this, surveying the literature, and it is very clear that there are many reasons for it. In fact, with my latest paper of reviewing, we've reviewed over 400 publications of various instances, is that there are so many ways. It's surprising there's not more. I mean, I mentioned the T-cell response being suppressed. It then switches the antibody IgG switch, so the system becomes tolerant, so the body's converted into it's ready for transplant, so it doesn't reject the kidney, therefore it doesn't reject the cancer. It can integrate into the genome next to oncogenes. Pfizer's full of SV40, a known oncogene. Many, many different ways it interferes with the metabolic pathways, all sorts of pathways, dozens of signaling pathways that if you overstimulate them, you'll drive cancer. They won't switch itself off. And the most one I'm worried about is it can bind and switch off the suppressor genes like P53, BRCA, MSH. Now, if you have a mutation in one of these genes naturally, which people do, that's just what happens, you get your cancer 20, 30 years earlier than you would normally. If you were to interfere with more than 2 or 3 of these things, you can bring that forward really far. And so that means when you do get a cancer, you haven't got the brakes. You've removed the brakes on it. And what is worrying is that I have seen, and I saw it in my very best friend, who had a booster just to travel. This is the nonsense. He did not need this booster. And he came down and presented a few weeks after the booster, and he said he never felt well since he had it. with very bad back pain, and so he was investigated. He was just riddled. It turned out to be melanoma. Somebody else, another good friend, had the same issue after the same booster. He was riddled too. His was myeloma. So, but I've never seen that sort of presentation in my life. In 40 years of doing this sudden boom. And it is definitely associated. And Ryan Cole in the States, he's one of many, many others that said this is real. And once you get into messenger RNA technology that can integrate at random, that's why it is the stupidest thing to try and make a vaccine on, because it is about as clever as trying to herd cats. It's absolutely impossible, and they should give up now. And the last thing I would say, with everything we've learned, please ban all messenger RNA vaccines, because they're not vaccines, they're gene therapies. If we don't, and giving them to children can interfere with their genome for the rest of their life, I think it is absolute. I mean, I regard the people that allowed these things to go into young people and children when we knew none of them were going to be killed as basically criminal medical negligence and the crime of the century.
Op dit exacte moment bewegen er miljoenen onzichtbare frequenties door jouw lichaam en de ruimte om je heen. Radiogolven, wifi, bluetooth, licht en geluid, magnetische velden en misschien zelfs signalen die we nog niet volledig begrijpen. Je ziet ze niet, je hoort ze niet, je voelt ze misschien onbewust, maar wat als ze meer invloed hebben op je leven dan je beseft? Wat is eigenlijk een frequentie? En als alles in het universum trilt, resoneert en een eigen frequentie heeft, welke rol spelen deze onzichtbare krachten dan in ons dagelijks leven? Nou, dat is één van de grote vragen die we gaan onderzoeken tijdens de allereerste editie van de Battle Beyond Science op 18 en 19 september dit jaar. Na het grote succes van de Battle for Science in februari, waar de staat van de wetenschap centraal stond, gaan we nu op zoek naar antwoorden op vragen waar de wetenschap geen of nog geen antwoord op heeft. Welke invloed hebben frequenties op ons lichaam, op onze gezondheid, op onze emoties en bewustzijn? En als die invloed er dan is, hoe werkt dat dan? Nou, dat gaan we dus visualiseren. Op grote schermen tonen we live hoe geluid, water, licht en trillingen zich vertalen naar indrukwekkende patronen en vormen. Niet alleen maar om het te zien, maar vooral ook om te leren, te ervaren en te voelen. Laat je dus verrassen door inspirerende lezingen, live-experimenten met onder andere remote viewing, telepathie, tijdreizen, kwantummechanica en soundhealing sessies die wetenschap, verwondering en beleving samenbrengen. Met bijzondere gasten zoals de Britse wetenschapper John Stuart Reid, Erik Larakker, Marijn Poels, Baptiste de Paap, professor Pierre Capel, contactee Elena Danaan en vele andere. Stuk voor stuk sprekers die je zullen uitdagen om verder te kijken dan de grenzen van de traditionele wetenschap. Reserveer vandaag nog je ticket en beleef het allemaal op 18 of 19 september tijdens de allereerste editie van de Battle Beyond Science. Want alles heeft een frequentie.
This program is brought to you by Monflow, ITAR Innovative Technology, Real Root Supplements, Pro Privacy, Goud 999 en VRB, van eenmanszaak naar BV.